We have another great session for you here at the ASU Learning Human event. This one was entitled Using Data Science Data and the Power of Community to Address the Student Loan Crisis. And we're lucky to have Nancy Rubin here to be speaking on that, as well as Karina and Laura, which are going to join her, I believe. And so go ahead and take it away, Nancy.
Great. I'm just going to queue up my slides and then we'll get going. So thanks everybody for joining today. I'm Nancy Rubin, and I was one of the first group of innovators and residents for ASU's ShapingEDU community. With me today are Laura Clark-Murray, who's head of partnerships and operations for Omdena, and Karina Alexanian, who was a project participant and also recently became head of research and learning for Omdena. They'll kind of be manning the chat, so if you have any questions throughout, please don't hesitate to ask. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well to answer some questions, verbally. You probably are all familiar with ShapingEDU. If you don't know, we're a community of dreamers, doers, and drivers that are shaping the future of learning in the digital age. I am, in addition to being an innovator in residence, the mayor of the Artificial Intelligence neighborhood, which is where you will often find me in our Slack community. For this project, I was lucky enough to partner with Omdena. Omdena is a company that's focused on building innovative, ethical, and efficient AI and data science solutions to real-world problems. Omdena runs challenges, which are super interesting. They run for 8 weeks. And they've been working on some really, really interesting challenges. If you want to know more about them, I encourage you to visit their website. And also you can sign up to attend one of their demo days. You can see some of the recent ones that they've done, really relevant things. They're focusing a lot on the pandemic. And they have one coming up around PTSD and disaster response. So applying AI for social good to real world problems, that's what really interested in me and why I wanted to work with them on my project for ShapingEDU. So my project looked at the student loan crisis. Just a little information about the student loan problem. It's a problem for me. That's a problem for many people. It's often characterized as being at crisis levels. It's only been exacerbated by the coronavirus. So student loan data show that there's almost $2 trillion in student loan debt right now. It's impacting almost 45 million Americans. There's over 11% of student loans are 90 days late or past due. Monthly payments are usually over $200. There's a big difference in debt for public, private, and for-profit colleges, which is not really surprising. 66% of graduates from public colleges have an average debt of $25,000. 75% of graduates from private nonprofit colleges have average debt of about $32,000. And 88% of graduates from for-profit colleges have an average debt of $40,000. Our challenge was to use data to analyze the student debt problem and propose ideas to address it. I don't think any of us thought that we would solve the problem, but we did identify some really interesting findings. This slide shows at a really high level some of the data science done for the project. There was a ton of data wrangling that was done. There is no shortage of data on student loans. We did sentiment analysis. There was a lot of machine learning that was performed. We did data visualization, topic modeling. There was lots of data science, lots of opportunity to use different approaches, which was really interesting. Kind of starting at the overview of what we found out and then working backwards. We grouped our findings into a few buckets. So with regard to some of the social implications with regard to student debt, One of the tasks, and we'll look at this as I go through what I mean by tasks and groups. So one of the groups worked on understanding reasons for student debt, and they looked at economic indicators. Another group developed insights from the impact of debt on demographic groups. We used sentiment analysis and topic modeling on news websites and social media sites. We analyzed the impact of student loans on mental health, and that kind of was a thread that came through in a number of different tasks. From a financial sort of perspective, we looked at spending habits. We predicted repayment capability by segmenting students. We analyzed the debt portfolio. And finally, there was a prototype web application that was developed, which I'll show you, which generate financial projections to help borrowers better understand student loans before they take them, and sort of the ability that they'll have to repay them. So how do things work? We kind of began the project with the ShapingEDU live event, introducing the topic. Again, this was sort of a project that I initiated as an innovator in residence. We had a live event introducing the topic. We opened applications for people that were interested in participating. Once the team was selected, we kicked off the project. We had Omdena's data scientists also were introduced to the challenge, and they applied to participate. So we had a really nice group of people working. The team sort of self-organizes into groups, or what are called tasks, and we work on different aspects of the challenge. We work throughout the week. Groups sharing ideas with each other. We have weekly project meetings, which I tell you became the highlight of my week. It wasn't just working on the project itself, but it was the people that I met while I was working on the project. Many of the data scientists are from other countries. And actually it was interesting because they weren't familiar with the scope of the problem. We really focused on student debt in the United States. Just an idea of how many people worked on the project. There were probably about 40 data scientists and collaborators on the project, how we sort of self-organized into different groups and worked on different areas. Some people worked on multiple areas, but just so you get an idea of sort of the scope of the number of people that were working on this. We had wonderful project leads as well to kind of shepherd us through making sure we were staying on task and meeting our objectives. I'm going to go through a lot of the findings fairly quickly with as much detail as possible. Again, these are really highlights of the project. The project was huge. It's really be impossible to relay all of the findings that we have, but I'm going to really show you some of the highlights. Task 11 looked at the reasons and the causes for the debt, so sort of looking at how they approach this. The group structured their analysis in stages to cover different aspects of debt and how it impacts different demographic groups. So they looked at starting with loan dimensions, participation trends, degrees, subject, institution. So I'm going back again, sorry about that. From the loan dimensions, the type of loan, starting at the decision, sorry. Participation trends, the degree and the subject, institutions, what the family and the households look like. Financial literacy, which was a thread that came through, sort of the lack of it regarding student loans and the implication of debt. They also looked at the dimensions of the loans, the types of loans that students were taking, the amount, if grants were available. They looked at what institutions people were studying at, completion rates, whether they took additional loans, if they were working while studying. They looked at the effect of debt on mental health, whether there was a perception of the value of the degree. There was a work that was done on the impact of COVID on a lot of the this recent data. And they also looked at after graduation, employment opportunities, what was going on in the industry, potential earnings as well. So it was really a very holistic study for this group. So kind of getting into some of the reasons and the causes why I don't think it's a surprise. We all know that college has become unaffordable. What you're seeing here are graphs that represent 1964 to 2017. Some of the factors that were identified as contributing to the cost of college becoming unaffordable are increasing cost in attending college all around. We'll see in a minute, there was reduction in state support for institutions, the rising cost of salaries that are paid to faculty and administrators, the cost of the facilities that are built. What was noticeable is that there was a decrease in financial support for universities around 2008, which was when we had the financial crisis. I think that this is significant because we are in another crisis and we could have a similar impact when we come out of this as well. So there is sort of a history for this. Kind of looking at the demographic analysis, this group explored the impact of student loans and analyzed post-graduation employment performance on selected demographic groups. They looked at sort of sex, race, and ethnicity. I think something really interesting to notice is that for the past 12 years, more women have been enrolling in college than men. Another insight for this group was student debt by institution and demographics. Private, public, for-profit. They compared repayment rates for demographic groups. So I think you can see here that private for-profit institutions have a higher percentage of women, minorities, and first-gen students. Pretty noticeably. And that loan repayment rates are lower for female and first-gen students in the majority of institutions. They broke down sort of debt by group. In general, minority students are more likely to be in debt and have more debt. Black students are half as likely to be debt-free than white students. Hispanic students that have debt of $35,000 or more, the debt doubled in 4 years. There was really rich insights into how loans are really impacting women, minorities, and ethnic groups. I don't think anyone would really be surprised that women, Blacks, Hispanic students are underrepresented in STEM. The data clearly showed that. STEM and business fields are still a domain for male students, whereas the healthcare students are overrepresented by women. Under 2% of women study computer science compared to nearly almost 10% of men. And nearly a quarter of the students in the healthcare field are Black students. We saw a lot of representation in a lot of the different tasks about the impact that debt has on people, on families, on mental health. That came through really clearly in a lot of the tasks. Looking at the levels of stress that were caused by debt, more than half of the students in for-profit institutions show higher levels of stress than from education-related debt. That's some of what you're kind of seeing here in, moderate, high, kind of how things were broken down, and then also kind of getting into which of the majors and how people perceive how much stress they have from the levels of debt. There was kind of noticeably, you could see that the other applied fields, which tend to be kind of nursing and also the humanities. Kind of relating to some of the presentations that we saw this morning about how people feel about the the value of their degree. The data showed that degree holders from for-profit institutions are more skeptical of their degrees. STEM degree holders have the highest levels of satisfaction, and those other fields, sort of humanities and the other applied fields, less so. So we looked at the percentage of bachelor's degree recipients who were reporting post-secondary education was worth the financial costs by selected borrowing, employment, enrollment, and demographic characteristics. Part of what we wanted to look at is, what makes sort of some recommendations about how we can address some of these things. And this group really kind of came up with some really interesting ideas. It's important that we sort of track what's going on. There's some really relevant data, especially about the for-profits and the population, this particular population that's sort of in those environments. We can publicize better the information about student loans and the impact it has. These are lengthy impacts. They're often 20 years. We can certainly challenge everyone to do better. We need to know more about the loans we're taking. The institutions need to publicize the information better. Kind of drilling down a little bit, we're looking at individuals, community, and institutions. And what was really clear is there's a tremendous lack of literacy about student loans and the impact that it has. So financial literacy was something that really came across loud and clear. The need for it was stark. Again, this whole group of institutions and for-profits, students really need to understand the implications of going to them, borrowing money, and what they're going to come out with on the other side, and really understanding whether that's a good trade-off. And again, along with the literacy, pre-planning. So we looked a lot at the financial literacy and also savings. I really went into this looking at it from the sort of the loan perspective. I was really focused on student loans, but what was really clear, the data is all about individual borrowing. So what was clear is that there needs to be more education and upfront information for individuals so that they can plan better. Literacy and savings were key. Institutions and the community, completion rates were, clearly impact debt. Doing a better job, making sure people complete. Loans are designed to be 4 years, but the longer they drag out, the longer you're in school, the more debt that you're going to occur. So, completion rates and transfers, it was clear there were issues there that related to student debt. We looked at work-study balance. Again, this demographic group, women, minorities, and certain ethnicities, there is not the same work-life balance. They're working almost full-time while they're going to school, and it just doesn't, it doesn't translate as well. Mental health was something we looked at a lot. And then looking more deeply from industries and government, again, addressing wage gaps in the career outcomes. So it's not just like the borrowing, it's what they come out with on the other side. There are tremendous wage gaps for women, better support. And again, this concept of the value of the degree and skills, which is something that's really relevant right now. So that conversation is, it's clear on what is the value. Is there a real, value in which degrees, and is there more value in perhaps certificates or shorter programs? Task 3 really dove into savings habits of American households to see if they could come up with recommendations on ways to save money for college in the future. The assumption they made is that to save a sizable amount required for college, households had to have at least 5 years to start saving. So they really only looked at households where children were under 12 years, and that was what they focused on. Households were classified according to the annual income based on U.S. News American Economic Class System. And the graph shown represents the percentage of households with children under 12 years that can save money for college based on the ages of each child in the household. The consumer expenditure data, which was looked at, underrepresents households with annual incomes over $300,000, which is why the top level shows that everyone is successful, which is why they're at 100%, which probably isn't 100% accurate. They looked at a lot of different things. I'm just kind of highlighting some things that will be relevant to a lot of people. It was clear that there is an impact on health insurance, on the cost of health insurance. It had negative ability on families' ability to save, regardless of their income class, kind of starting at the upper left with what would be classified as poor incomes, and then moving around down, right, and then up. Also, everyone is impacted by health insurance. The cost of health insurance really impacts everyone's ability to save. Something I don't think is surprising to really anyone. They also looked at, adjusting expenses. They did a lot of work on identifying different expense categories, and then they did a lot of adjusting to see how that would impact savings. So they divided the expenditures into categories. They looked at food, alcohol, housing, apparel, transportation, health, entertainment, personal care, reading, education, tobacco, miscellaneous, cash contributions, personal insurance. And then they grouped some of the categories together: alcohol, tobacco, entertainment, cash, into what they considered non-essential spending. And they tweaked the results. When non-essential expenditures were adjusted, every household could save. And if there was attention paid to certain areas of expenditures, it could really result in up to 10% of an increase in savings. So by tweaking different categories, that's what they really looked at. They took different categories, adjusted them, ran multiple of these box plot scenarios, and looked at the different levels of savings that could be attained. One group did sentiment analysis. There was quite a bit actually of sentiment analysis. So they scraped data from Forbes using an open source web scraper tool from Google. They also scraped data from change.org and Medium using a free Chrome extension. You can see the main sentiments reflected in the word cloud. Clearly, there's an interest here. People are very focused on loan forgiveness. Something that people would really like to see. They'd like to see a plan. Again, millennials kind of coming out. Again, with loan forgiveness really front and center with some of the COVID relief packages. So not surprising that, that was seen there. A lot of interest, overall in this problem and what could be done about it. Another group really focused on the impact of mental health. They went through a group of papers on the topics of debt and the impact of debt in general on mental health. Hoping to do a meta-analysis, but really didn't have enough time. So what they were able to do was some text mining, visualization of terminologies with word clouds. They did topic modeling using clustering techniques. What you can see here is kind of the distribution of the 20 most common terms that were used in academic papers. Terms like stress, financial, mental, disorder, psychological were very commonly used in the papers. Kind of turned that into word cloud visualizations. So the insights were visualized into word clouds with, again, debt, student, health, mental receiving the most emphasis. Kind of on the right, you can see there was kind of some somewhat alarming things that the impact on the family and children, something we hope to dive into a little bit more deeply. But there was this strain of the impact of debt on mental health and how it translated down to the family level, how it was impacting family dynamics, which could be really concerning. They kind of dove in a little bit deeper. They used some natural language processing, LDA technology, LDA methodologies. to build kind of deeper topic models. And we're able to identify a potential connection. You can see in topic 3 and topic 4, there may be a relationship, again, between debt and mental health. Not really surprising. But it was really interesting. Again, we approached this from a lot of different ways, and it was interesting how we saw different results in sort of the different tasks and how people approached their, what they were looking at and their analysis. Another group, again, looked at some sort of student segmentation and their repayment capability. There was so much data analysis done in this task. I am not doing it justice as I kind of whiz through the findings. I would say that for all the groups, but particularly this one. There was so much rich data analysis and visualization. Each group could probably be a report on its own. They did a literature analysis. Again, remember, the data scientists weren't that familiar with the topic, so they wanted to learn more about it. So they did a literature analysis to help them understand and to help guide their selection of some of the variables that they were going to use. They used machine learning to predict student repayment capability. They segmented students based on variables. You can see some of the data sources that were used. The data, the variable set was immense. The data sets were huge. They did pre-processing done. They were trying to determine relevant features for the segmentation and the necessary insight. What was really interesting is that they were able to share some data sets throughout the project. So task 1 did a terrific job. They basically normalized all the data. There was one group that did a lot of data combining normalization, and one group did a lot of modeling for all the other groups. And it was great to see that they were able to share some of the resources that they were gathering throughout the different groups. They shortlisted their relevant variables from the insight that they gathered from the literature review. They did extensive exploratory data analysis. I mean, there was so much visualization. It's just, I'm not doing it justice. They shortlisted variables to create segments with clustering. And there were tremendous, there was tremendous insights into this. I'm not even showing the work that they did because it really can't even be shown on a PowerPoint screen. It was really impressive. Another group focused on kind of looking at repayment in greater detail. What I'm showing you here are really what they came up with, the best locations in the United States if you wanted to live where you might be able to pay back your loans. And that would be in the state of Utah. Where it showed that student loan payments were only 10% of annual income on average. They also kind of went into more depth on the cities. So we kind of looked at cities that were better for maintaining or better earning to debt ratio. It is important to note that the cities, most of these cities are near what would be considered, job centers. So it's not all that surprising that these were the cities that were identified as being good places to live as far as earnings would go, your ability to be in a good position to pay back your debt. They scraped loan applications. What was really interesting, and I say guilty as one of these people, they scraped loan applications to see frequency of terms, of the most common terms that were in the purpose section of why people were applying for loans. And it indicated an alarming number of students are taking loans to pay back existing debt through debt consolidation. Other essentials, credit cards, home improvement, small businesses, cars, medical were also seen. And they also did sort of a sentiment analysis showing the most common emotions applicants feel. Not surprisingly, anticipation, Interestingly, trust, positivity, fear, and joy, kind of less common. What was really interesting to me were, kind of this whole concept of, the debt consolidation, and how people are, reapplying for loans to do that. So I'm going to wind up with and show you what was really exciting was that one of the groups built a prototype. They built a web application based on the premise that, you need to be a well-informed consumer. So knowing what you're getting yourself into can really help you with being able to pay back your debt on the back end. This web app provides the necessary tools for users to know what can happen for someone similar to them. So they developed kind of personas depending on the personal characteristics and chosen payment plan. The web app provides information about loan amounts and years to repay based on users' characteristics and college choice. This is important because sometimes students overestimate the financial needs they may have in years ahead. So I'm going to kind of pop out of this and kind of pop into the, so this is actually the prototype that was developed. Users are able to input their loan details, kind of see the resulting chart. Again, what was really clear was this need for financial literacy on the part of borrowers. And that was sort of the purpose of developing this application. Kind of reminded me of like Carvana, where you model what your loan is going to be. That's kind of the thought behind this as well. So here, and we'll play with it a little bit. The yellow line shows the range of total amount paid if the user keeps the loan and interest rate the same. And again, as you scroll over, it gives you, more information. So questions users may ask themselves when they're considering a loan: can I afford the monthly payment after I graduate? Can I reduce the payment, the repayment period, and reduce the additional interest that I'm paying? And will I be able to take a smaller loan amount instead? These questions can be taken into account with some of their, so the second part here are some savings that you can model. So you can kind of model some of your savings and looking at your payment ability. So the thought behind that is that users are able to have different levels of savings in different periods of their lives. So before, during, and after college, where users work part-time, versus full-time jobs. And as they adjust some of the inputs, they'll be able to see whether or not they might, how that's going to impact their ability to repay a loan. So the less savings I might have after I graduate is going to tell me whether I have, whether I'm going to be able to make my payment, if I have enough savings. And again, I can keep modeling things and kind of compute them. What was really interesting is, I think on the bottom is the ability to look at other people similar. So the bottom part shows what the 3-year default rate is of students in colleges and universities, which can show them whether they have enough savings. So it looks at what they've actually done is aggregated data from thousands of, hundreds of universities. So they can look at compare how repayments are for different institutions using different inputs. And so these are right off some of the loan applications. So whether you're dependent or independent, what your family income is, your gender, a first-gen student or not, and which institution you might be going to. So we'll just choose kind of, and how the figures will change. So you can look at first year if what the percentage of people who actually paid their loans. So what the likelihood of somebody at that, and you can look at, different kinds of colleges. So kind of pick something that's maybe a little more for-profit-y. So not every, let's try. But lots of fun to kind of play with, to be able to see what the impact is of loans, and when you would be able to pay them off, what your monthly payment might be. So, if I was to borrow $20,000 as opposed to $30,000, what the interest would be on my loan. So if it's maybe 4%, how long I would repay my loan in. So, actually most loans are 20 years. That's kind of where we're at right now. And see what the impact of that is going to be. What the interest is, how much I'm going to pay. I mean, these are things that are kind of hidden from people on the front end. And having something like this, this is kind of in rough form, but this is really the kind of information people need up front to make really educated decisions about the loans that they're taking. So I'm going to kind of stop sharing for a minute, kind of look at the chat, and kind of see what's going on. Kind of open for questions. If anyone has any, I'm happy to talk sort of about the process. I do have folks from Omdena here if you have questions about that. So I think what was really evident is giving them the tools that they need. What was really clear and why the app was developed was to be able to model the different elements of the loan. So really looking at the school that they were going to go to, what their personal financial situation was, and then modeling out what the loan was going to look like. So I think, really with the tool that we developed was the whole purpose is to kind of show them, how they can model things out, how much they borrow, how much interest that's going to be, over a particular period of time, and, with different repayment capabilities. So I think what was really, really clear through the whole project was the lack of financial literacy. On the part of borrowers, I'm guilty myself. It's really easy, especially for undergraduates. Getting a loan is not that difficult. I think what a big part of the problem is I think there was this period of time where people were taking the maximum amount of student loans available. And I think there's a lot more focus on, like you say, advising people to take only what they need and not to take everything that's available to them. I think we found really surprising some, and I will be honest, we really just finished up kind of recently. Karina is with me today, and I are summarizing the results. There was so much data and so much rich insight. We found that there is tremendous stress caused by debt. There's really, and I said my biggest insight, I think, was kind of looking at it from the loan perspective. But what was clear is slicing and dicing the data is about borrowers. And what was clear where I think we could have a real impact was how much was letting people know, really approaching it from an individual perspective. And I think what Karina says, there was really stark data about the predatory nature of for-profit institutions, particularly on women and minorities who are attending those institutions. That came out loud and clear. So I think it was the level of debt, the spread of debt. Karina, if you want to, please unmute if because you have such rich insights also. So please jump in.
Sure,
yeah.
I'll speak to that.
Please do.
Yeah, I found there was some really interesting statistics about the debt that you sort of assume that it's a lot of people holding really high debt, but it's actually a lot of people holding low debt. And it seems that like addressing some of the low debt was a big issue. The other big finding that I saw was that there's a real issue with students not completing school. And so then you incur this debt and then you don't graduate, and now you have two negative things against you, or taking a really long time to complete school. So there's like some real small tweaks, like making sure that students complete school on time, making sure that they graduate, helping them really manage not, you know, under $20,000, sometimes under $10,000 in debt, that just the interest rates, and it accrues and accumulates and becomes this burden. And that if you can kind of deal with it early on, helping students address that. Those kind of, so the fact that there were some actual easy or kind of low hanging fruit in terms of the fixes, and it's not people, for instance, like myself, who have high graduate school debt. That's
right,
a different category. But how much there's like this small, and just like educating so many people, the data shows, go into it not knowing what they're going into. They just do not understand the, and it's on the responsibility of the schools too, the schools themselves. The loan institutions are not motivated to have students repay debt, essentially. So they're not motivated to inform students properly, to make it clear in advance to them, and to help them develop plans for repayment. And at the same time, the schools are also not really being entirely transparent about the process and the repercussions. And so there's really, there's not a lot of people that are kind of in the student's corner or in the borrower's corner on this. So,
so Laura said, student debt's a huge problem. Do we think AI techniques have an impact moving it forward? I mean, yes, there is so much data. I mean, there's so much public data. I mean, we had to kind of focus people on the most recent data, because you can go back so many years. You kind of have to decide what decade, you know, so we kind of focused on most recent decades. Yes, I do think, because there's so much data and there was so much rich analysis. Like I said, I really just showed some of the highlights that are consumable and easy to show in this format. But I think Karina and I were both amazed at the richness of the modeling and everything that went on, and the insights. It was truly amazing.
I think one of the things that was interesting for me as kind of a first-time participant in this project, and looking at some of the other Omdena projects, I find that some projects lend themselves more easily to straight data science, where there's a challenge and it's clear how the AI or the data science or the machine learning approaches can really address it. And challenges like this one that are more intertwined with big picture social problems really need a combination of social scientists and data scientists. And each one is kind of both groups have their own specialty. You know, the social scientists don't necessarily know how to play with the numbers as well as the data scientists. And the data scientists need help knowing what questions to ask and how to interpret the results. So in the case of this project, it's really the collaboration between the two that I feel like moved it forward. And, you know, in other, I think, future Omdena projects that have that kind of social science component, that will be really helpful.
I think for me, in addition to like the insights, it was, like I said, the experience, the diversity of the data scientists, the number of women that you have, that you bring to the table, the friendships that I made, you know, while working on the project. It's not just what, you know, like you do AI and you do data science, and these projects are so important, but you have this whole community of people that you're, you know, mentoring and bringing along. And that is what was, you know, I wasn't kidding when I said I looked forward to, you know, our weekly meetings. It was just I couldn't keep up. You know, there was just so much going on, and just the, you know, what people bring to the table and how smart they are and willing to share their knowledge and expertise. You know, that was as interesting to me as doing the work itself. Right?
Nancy, I agree. And I think, you know, speaking to Malia's question, she's talking about that there are more women attending college, but a small portion of them in STEM degrees. Yeah, I think, you know, you have to feel like this is a place where you can see yourself, and where there are other people like you, and that it's accepting to you, and the work is interesting for you. And I think that Omdena like really is so great at hitting all of those, because it's absolutely true that there are women, I think it's 50% women on the projects, and they're women from all over the world. And it's so interesting seeing their work and their insights. And the more women, you know, the more you get, the more you're going to have people seeing themselves. And I think the fact that the work is meaningful really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to add, I'll jump in here too, to add to that. Because just to set some background on Dana, you know, we're just over a year old, and we've done 21, 22 projects. And we're now approaching 1,300 collaborators from all over the world. So we're bringing these very, very diverse people with their diverse perspectives. And as was mentioned, each of our projects typically have at least 30% women participating, and often bubbling up into being the leadership positions on those projects. So this is just one of the ways we're kind of getting at avoiding the bias and doing AI ethically, kind of from the start, by bringing in the, you know, people who are it's not a homogeneous crowd who's working on these projects. This particular project with ShapingEDU and with Nancy being just, you know, just yet another wonderful example of that, and the richness that comes out of that. So it's been very exciting.
So I think we're almost out of time. I thank you two for being with me today. Thank you, Karina, for drawing, as always. Thank you, Holden, for moderating. And thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. See you guys.